It's a new day dawning, the time is at hand, where the glory of the Lord will be revealed to every man. Open the door, open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory in. Open the door, open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory in.
All right. Let the King of Glory in. Open up the door. Starts right now. So fling wide, you heavenly gates. Prepare the way of the risen Lord. The Apostle John was on the island of Patmos. He was in prison for the testimony of Jesus Christ. And he heard a sound behind him and said, Behold, I looked. There was a door standing open in heaven, and I heard a voice which was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, Come up here, and I will show you the things which must take place. That's what we need, my friends. We need a heavenly perspective of the things that are going on in the world around us, the things that the Word of God foretold us would come to pass, those things which must take place, those things which are taking place even now. That is what this broadcast is all about, discussing the issues of the day, discerning the times in which we live. From a biblical perspective and worldview, good day, everybody. Andy White here. What you are about to hear is the fusion of heart, mind, and soul. I want to welcome everybody from all across the fruited plain and all around the spherical globe. Thanks for tuning in to this week's edition of Open Up the Doors. And I am, as always, streaming live over on my Open Up the Doors Facebook page over on facebook.com/faithfm91.7. If you'd like to join in over there, join the conversation over there, send me some comments, share this around your various streams as well. I would really appreciate that. You can follow me also on Truth Social Network at AJ White. If you are on the Truth Social Network, join me over there. The fellowship there and the networking there is growing, and I'm really beginning to appreciate that platform so very much. If you're not over there yet, get on over to Truth Social, and my handle is again AJ White. If you are outside of the Faith FM broadcast area, the best way to listen to Faith FM is to download the free Faith FM app. We have the app for the Android platform as well, of course, as the Apple platform. Just look it up. Find them on your respective app store platforms. Look up Faith FM in Sag Harbor, because there are other Faith FMs around the country, but we are the one in Sag Harbor on the east end of Long Island. So download the app. It's a great resource to have. All right, so I think that was cover my preliminaries. I'm trying to get through them as fast as I can because I want to get to really everything I have on my plate for today. One more thing, though. Write down the phone number. I will be going to the phones. That's the plan, as always. I will be going to the phones in the second hour. If you'd like to call in and be part of the broadcast, the phone number is 631-725-2069, 631-725-2069. Again, if you'd like to be part of the broadcast later on today. In the meantime, you could also shoot me questions, as I said, on my Facebook stream, and I'll keep an eye on that and try and address any questions or comments you might have. All right, let's get to it, folks. I want to begin from reading out of the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 10, and that's going to be really the framework for the things I have on my heart to share today. But we read in Matthew chapter 10, verses 16 through 20, Jesus telling the disciples and us through them and through the gospel, Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. I think that's the only place in the scripture that I can remember where a serpent is actually put in a positive light. Be wise. The Bible says that he who wins souls is wise. But anyway, therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves, but beware of men. I want you to listen real carefully. But beware of men, Jesus said, for they will deliver you up to councils and scourge you in their synagogues. You will be brought before governors and kings for my sake as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles, or to the unbelieving world in our day and age. But when they deliver you up, Do not worry about how or what you should speak, for it will be given to you in that hour what you should speak. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father who speaks in you. And I've experienced this so many times in my life as I've been out sharing the gospel on the streets. But folks, we live in an age where church attendance has plunged, and intolerance of traditional religious values has skyrocketed. Christians have been dragged into court for their faithfulness in standing up for and living out their moral convictions. We've seen, and I've followed through the years, the stories, even really for the past decade, where even here in America, we've seen people like, remember Jack Phillips, the wedding cake baker and cake artist in Colorado, who had his business and his life ruined because he stood for his Christian convictions, and he would not allow himself to be forced to do something against his conscience. And they have come after him time and time and time again. Every time he wins a case, the wolves come after him again. And he's been dealing with this for the last decade. But then there is also a woman you might remember, Paranel Stutzman. I covered her story as well 6-7 years ago, from Washington State, the Christian florist who also was sued into bankruptcy, causing her to lose her business and her living because she was living out her Christian faith. And more recently, there is this graphic designer named Laurie Smith, who just this past week won a huge Supreme Court case that I'm going to get to in a few minutes. But the reality is, these are, of course, just a few of the literally thousands and thousands of people who have faced the ravenous wolves of a godless and God-hating culture. Christians have been mocked, scorned, pilloried, impugned, and even far worse, in many cases, in the court of public opinion, if not an actual courtroom. So I want Jesus' words that I already spoke. I really want you to think on them. Let them sink in, folks. Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. But beware of men, for they will deliver you up to councils and scourge you in their synagogues. You will be brought before governors and kings for my sake. And as I said a moment ago, the polls and many recent studies tell us that belief in God is at an all-time low here in America. Yet, brothers and sisters, regardless of all of that, I want to tell you that there is, in fact, because I see it time and time again on the streets, and I saw it last Friday night when we went out on the streets, I want to tell you that there is a hunger and a yearning in many people who are searching for truth, who are seeking to know God. And in another well-known passage that we're all familiar with in Luke, Jesus said the harvest truly is great, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. Go your way, and here in a parallel passage of Scripture, like I read out of Matthew, go your way, behold, I send you out as lambs among the wolves. As I said a moment ago, last Friday night, several of us, a group of us, went out to share the gospel in downtown Riverhead. They're having these events throughout the summer. They did them last year called Alive on 25. And oh, what a night it was, my friends. I got there a little bit late. I had to meet up with my team there on Main Street. I got there maybe 15 or 20 minutes later than, they all met at 6. I didn't get there until like 20 after 6 or so because I had to come home from work, take a shower, shovel some food down, some dinner down my mouth and head out. But as I approached them, they had only been on the streets. Maybe 15 or 20 minutes. And I found them because my compadres were we had our sign out. We had the yellow sign out, which simply says, ask me about Jesus. So it was easy to find them. Signs sticking up above that crowd there. And as I'm approaching them, they were already praying with a group of young girls. They were already engaged. And I know they had only been out on the streets a few minutes, but they were already engaged with some really good conversations. And I meandered over there, and since it was already going on, I didn't intrude. I just kind of circled around a little bit, getting the feel of what was going on, putting the ear on the conversation. And these were young girls who were just filled with sincere questions, and they wound up praying for them to receive Jesus, praying for them for salvation, giving them Bibles, and I was like, oh man, praise God. And the funny thing is I was so distracted. I'll be honest with you. I was a little distracted going out on the streets last Friday because I had worked all day. It was hot. Generally, when I do outreaches, I like to, be prayed up, of course, and be prepared. And I really felt ill prepared, to be honest with you, going out on the streets last week. And I just said, God, take the wheel, Jesus, take the wheel. I'm going to throw myself to the wolves, so to speak. But it ended up being something that only God can do. But anyway, as I said, we prayed throughout the night with several young people to give their lives to Jesus. I handed out a half dozen Bibles to people who asked for them. And yes, many people walked by us. Hundreds walked by us, ignoring us, even mocking us. But here's the point. There were many who came up to us with searching and open hearts. The harvest truly is great. Even in the midst of the darkness, even in the midst of declining church attendance, even in the midst of all the negativity, there are people who are yearning to know God. There really are. And that's the Spirit of God is moving to go after that remnant. I believe it. There's a hungry harvest of souls to be won. Having said that, of course, but beware of men, Jesus said, because the powers and principalities, not to mention the organizers of the Alive on 25, they weren't very happy about our being there. Man, I'm telling you, it got to be kind of funny and comical in some ways, but there was such irony in this whole episode. It was the 4th of July weekend, last weekend, of course, on a night when there would be a fireworks display in celebration of our liberty and independence right there on the Peconic River and along Main Street in Riverhead. But we had the organizers of the 25 Alive event in Riverhead. They were going apoplectic and trying to shut us down from our First Amendment rights of both freedom of speech and freedom of religion. But we stood our ground, and we didn't yield for a moment. They came up to us, the organizers, and they asked us if we had a permit. And I said to the one woman, I said, a permit for what? She goes, well, all these people with their tables and stuff, they all pay $200 for a permit to promote their business. And my associate said, well, we're not promoting any business. We're promoting Jesus. Unfortunately, he used that word. She goes, aha, you're promoting something. I kind of stepped in at that point and said, excuse me, ma'am. I'll admit I was a little, I was a little snarky because I could see the attitude. And I just looked and I said, ma'am, we're standing in the middle of a public street at a public event. We're not going to move, and we don't need to pay for a permit because we're not selling anything and we don't have a table. So, did you ever hear of this thing? It's called the First Amendment. And she just kind of snarled at me and walked away. She comes back later, a few minutes later, says, we're going to call the cops. And we basically said, well, go right ahead, call the cops. And she says to us, are you willing to take it this far? And my friend says, we'll go to jail for Jesus if that's what you want to do, but we ain't moving. We've got a right to be here, and you can't make us stop. And so anyway, they went and got the cops. They went and got they were trying to throw us off the street because we didn't have a permit, so they said, and they kept insisting that, and they were getting angrier and angrier that we needed to leave. But again, I'll say it, we knew our rights. We have, and it was, again, 4th of July weekend. Yeah, Anyway, the cops showed up, and they were all kind of smiling, and they were all friendly, and they weren't saying anything. But the cops They saw our conversation going on with the organizers. They were standing right there because the organizers were basically telling the cops that they needed to tell us to leave. The cops turned around and told them they have a right to do this. We're not telling them to leave. And they went crazy. They went crazy. The cop looked at us and he said to us again, "Are you selling anything?" We went, "No." And I said, "Officer, honestly, we're not trying to make any trouble. We're just sharing the gospel. We're not forcing ourselves on anybody. See the sign, ask me about Jesus. People come up to us willingly, and we're praying with people." And actually, a group of my comrades there were praying with people. So the cops saw what was going on. And the cops saw firsthand what was going on. They turned around and they told the organizers that we're not stopping them. And then the police lieutenant shows up because they said they were pushing, the organizers were pushing for this, and they said, "We want your superiors." So the lieutenant came down and actually yelled at the organizers, saying that the Supreme Court, which they did, I'll get to that in a moment, the Supreme Court that very day had upheld our constitutional rights. It was sweet, I'll tell you. It was a sweet, albeit rare moment of victory that the cops just took our side, and it just blew up in these people's faces. And in the midst of all of this distraction that was going on, I was busy witnessing to two Muslims for about an hour. And it was interesting because if you remember, just last week I had talked about Eid al-Adha, the Muslim feast of sacrifice, where they wrongly talk about Abraham sacrificing up Ishmael. But I got into a really great conversation with these two Muslims. In the meantime, all this stuff was going on behind me and back of me, but I was focused at that moment. I was focused on sharing with these two Muslims. Pray for two Muslims named Eli and Hassan, by the way, because I know they were obviously we left. We parted after about an hour. We parted with not changing or budging in anything, but I know there was stuff I was saying there that was. They were just peppering me with questions, and I'm not even going to go into all that. I could be on this broadcast for a whole hour talking about that conversation. But again, it was distractions. It was the powers and principalities trying to shut us down and even trying to drag us before the governing authorities. But the Spirit of God was there, and like Paul appealed to the Roman authorities, we made our appeal, and in this case, they happen to agree with us on a glorious 4th of July weekend. But I'm sharing all this to say, yes, folks, the harvest truly is plentiful. And the enemy will do all that he can do to hinder both the message and the messenger. Our liberties, and especially our religious liberties, are under attack in this nation. Notwithstanding some recent Supreme Court decisions that have been good, but nevertheless, the attack is underway. Because, as I said a moment ago, the powers and principalities and the rulers of this dark age, they hate the message of Jesus Christ. And they will call us troublemakers. They will impugn us as haters and as the troublers of democracy, when in fact the exact opposite is true. They are the haters. They are the troublers of liberty, democracy in America. In fact, the organizer, when we were having this kerfuffle with them and the police, the organizer blatantly said that our "Ask Us About Jesus" sign was offensive, and that she wanted us to take that sign down. And we basically, in a nice way, said, "Tough." Again, I reiterated the fact that, did you ever hear this thing called the First Amendment? And then the cops just undergirded the same message. Because yes, despite all the negativity, despite all the attacks on our liberty, we still have a Constitution, and we still have a right to preach the gospel. And even if we didn't, we'd still be doing it anyway. But I won't digress on that point. But they were calling us troublemakers. The cops saw us praying with people. They were calling us haters. The cops saw the only people that were angry. We were almost laughing at this point. The only people that were angry were the organizers because they wanted us to go away. And they kept saying they're attracting a crowd around them. Now, actually, the crowds, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people were walking by us, number one. And they were accusing us of attracting a crowd. We'd be talking to 2 or 3 people at the most at a time, you know? And it's like, besides that, even if we were attracting a crowd, lady, isn't that what you want here? Anyway. But I am reminded, before I go to a break, I am reminded of what Elijah said to King Ahab. When we read in 1 Kings, where then it happened when Ahab saw Elijah, that Ahab said to him, "Is that you, O troubler of Israel?" And Elijah answered, "I have not troubled Israel, but you and your father's house have, in that you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord and have followed after the Baals." In other words, you're the enemy of all that is good and righteous and just and holy. And we're going to stand our ground. I came across this article. I'll share this real quick. I have to go to a break, but I came across this article the other day where Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, it's great. Her kids painted this chalk. Now remember, she's the governor. She lives in the governor's mansion. It's now their home. It's their house. The little kid. She has little kids, and her kids painted this. Not painted. They took chalk and they made this beautiful mural. The picture of it is incredible what these kids did. But they made this beautiful mural on the sidewalk into the governor's mansion, the walkway of a cross and like stained glass. I'll try and post a picture because it was really incredible what they did. And she tweeted it out and showed, she went on Twitter, tweeted it out, and said that, look what my kids did. People, this is what's going to greet people as they come to visit the governor's mansion. This beautiful piece of artwork. Long story short, the Americans United Against whatever they are. It's an atheist group. Americans United, a not-profit organization based in Washington, D.C., the group wrote a letter to the governor arguing that the chalk artwork conveys, quote, an impermissible message that those who do not share the favored faith are unwelcome and will be treated differently. No, it doesn't say that at all. But anyway, I love what Sarah said. Oh, this is great. This is great. Well, she responded. Sarah Huckabee Sanders on Twitter said, "Dear Americans United, I have received your letter and my answer is no. I will not erase the beautiful cross my kids drew in chalk on the driveway of the governor's mansion or remove my post on social media, and I will not now or ever hide that I am a Christian. I will not bow now and never hide that I'm saved by Christ," Sanders wrote in a letter to the American United Group. And then she said this, "In Arkansas, we stand up to the bullying liberals. We won't let you power wash our kids' chalk drawings off our front steps. We won't let you tear down Christmas decorations and stomp our traditions into the dirt. We don't live our lives in fear of strongly worded letters coming down from Washington." As of now, the chalk cross remains intact. Folks, stand your ground. Yes, there are wolves. Yes, they will come and drag us away to the courts if they can. But stand your ground, church, because resistance is not futile. Jesus said we are the salt of the earth. No, we can't stop the corruption, but we can slow it down. The Lord also said this, however, salt is good. But if the salt loses its saltiness, it's good for nothing. Stick around. I'll be back with much, much more. Here's Jamie Smith. Tune I haven't played for a long time, but it's so apropos. Salt and Light. Keep it right here on Faith FM. I'll be back. Jamie Smith, Salt and Light. You are listening to the fusion of heart, mind, and soul. And music is what feelings sound like. Welcome back. Andy White here on the radio, tearing down strongholds. Again, you're listening to Open Up Doors, Integrity in Broadcasting here on Faith FM, WEGB 90.7 and 93.3 in that peak, WEGQ 91.7 in Quag. Anyway, all right. I want to get back to my meat and potatoes here. It's funny. Before I get there, something told on the way into the broadcast today. I said to myself, I have a funny feeling something is going to go on with the video stream today. I don't know why I felt that way. We've really been having a lot of success with it during the years. We haven't had too many problems, really. It's been really going really smooth, but for some reason I had a feeling like this just might happen today. But whatever the case is, all right. Getting back to the topic at hand, I am constantly seeing Christian authors, Christian blogs, where they're speaking out against Christians engaging in the quote-unquote culture war. We just need to preach the gospel, they contend, and forget about fighting these culture wars. And honestly, I'm constantly scratching my head. Constantly scratching my head when I see these articles. Because preaching the gospel in and of itself, brothers and sisters, is engaging in the culture war. The gospel itself goes against the culture by its very nature. And I read these articles sometimes, and I just scratch my head. Because when you preach the gospel correctly, you've got to confront the issues that are at hand, that are leading people and entrapping people in sin. I've said it thousands and thousands of times during the course of the years I've been doing this broadcast, that the culture war issues are biblical issues. Homosexuality is a sin issue. Child trafficking is a sin issue. Transgenderism is a sin issue. Child trafficking, genital mutilation of minors, they're sin issues. Injustice is a sin issue. Whatever do you mean? We've got to stop fighting these culture wars. I just really it doesn't jive with me. It just doesn't. Because I'm going to say it again. The church needs to stop acquiescing by allowing the culture and the world to define the narrative. The gospel is at war with the God of this world. The gospel is a direct attack on the culture. The kingdom of heaven is invading the kingdoms and the cultures of this world, invading the darkness, and the darkness can't handle it. It can't stop it. The preaching of the gospel is by definition an engagement in the culture war. End of story. I've often quoted Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and I'm going to do it again now. The church cannot remain a positive force if it continues to remove itself from the stress and strain of contemporary events. The church has a prophetic role to play in the world, not just a pastoral one. Bonhoeffer didn't just say those words. He lived them. And he was executed by Hitler because he lived them. Martin Luther King also made similar comments. Martin Luther King said the church must be reminded that it is not the master or the servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state. The church must be the guide and the critic of the state, and never its tool. If the church does not recapture its prophetic zeal, similar to what Bonhoeffer said, it will become an irrelevant social club without moral or spiritual authority. Funny how Martin Luther King Jr. suffered a similar fate as Dietrich Bonhoeffer. As you well know, MLK was assassinated for living out his convictions. I'm reminded again, Jesus said, "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves." The kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. You know, I was pondering that scripture the other day, and I looked it up in some other versions. The King James Version is really the one we quote all the time. But the New Living Translations renders this verse in a very interesting manner. The kingdom of heaven has been forcefully advancing, and violent people are attacking it. That kind of changes, I think, the perspective of that verse. But it's an interesting, it kind of works either way. There's this great article in the Federalist I read this week, and I hardly recommend you read it. By the author's name was Kaylee Griswold, and the title of the article was "Courage is a Christian's Only Path Forward from the Legal Hell the Winsome Gospel Wrought." And Kylie writes in this article, and I've got it posted on the Open Up the Doors, the Open Up the Doors Facebook page. But she writes, "To be winsome is to be charming." This winsome gospel that she's talking about. She says, to be winsome is to be charming, attractive, or appealing with one's demeanor or character. It's an admirable goal, to be sure, and one that should apply to Christians. However, winsomeness has morphed and mutated. And with each mutation, it looks a little more like worldliness and a little less like godliness. In co-opting the idea into a veritable doctrine, Christian leaders morphed winsomeness from a desirable trait into a hermeneutic through which they judge all Christian conviction and conduct. The gist of the winsome ethos is that for Christians to be faithful, they must be perceived as kind and likable by the unbelieving world they hope to evangelize. I'm reminded that the Lord said, "Woe to you when all men speak well of you. For so did their fathers to the false prophets." But back to the article. And I'm looking at my stream here. All right. Back to the article. She writes, "The symptoms of winsomeness are easy to identify. Appeasement to radicals and a tossing of other faithful Christians under the bus. They don't agree with your view of being charming. Race baiting wrapped in Christianese," and the list goes on and on. But the author writes, and I agree with her, "There's a glaring problem with the winsome worldview. It ultimately measures," listen to what she writes, this was astute of her, "it ultimately measures a Christian's fidelity to the gospel based on how he is perceived by God's enemies. And in the process, it implies Christians who aren't adored by their unregenerate neighbors are unloving." This version, folks, of Christianity doesn't work. What you end up with, on the one hand, are craven Christians who pat themselves on the back for their likability while being largely untethered from all the principles save the approval of men, which conveniently endows worldly status and prestige upon them. But on the other hand, you have steadfast believers like Laurie Smith that I mentioned in the first block, and Jack Phillips and Barronelle Stutzman, who despite relentless persecution faithfully embody the fruits of the Spirit most difficult to cultivate: love, gentleness, kindness, and self-control. And yet the world still hates them. Yet the world still hates them. But isn't that exactly what Jesus promised his followers would be the result of their commitment? The world hated him, and so it will hate his disciples too. The article ends with a little bit of this. There's a lesson to be learned from the aforementioned heroes, whose mission is not winsomeness. I don't care how charming people think I am. I don't care how likable people think I am. My wife thinks I'm charming and she likes me. That's all that matters. But Kaylee writes, there's a lesson to be learned from the aforementioned heroes, whose mission is not winsomeness but fidelity to the gospel of Jesus Christ. That means that when a lost soul demands Laurie Smith violate God's divine law by approving of sexual sin, she can't capitulate with a modest smile and an accommodating website in hopes of wooing him to Jesus. She instead prays for courage to say, no, I will not design that. She stands her ground, and she stood her ground all the way to the Supreme Court, folks, and she won her case. And she won her case last Friday for all of us. In a 6-3 landmark decision last Friday, the Supreme Court ruled that graphic designer Laurie Smith can't be compelled to affirm values that conflict with her deeply held religious beliefs about marriage by designing wedding websites for same-sex couples. Justice Gorsuch wrote in the ruling, quote, the First Amendment's protections belong to all, not just to speakers whose motives the government finds worthy. The First Amendment envisions the United States as a rich and complex place where all persons are free to think and speak freely as they wish, not as the government demands, Gorsuch wrote. And that very night, on Main Street, Riverhead, we had a police lieutenant tell those event organizers that the Supreme Court of the United States of America that very day upheld our right to stand for the gospel in the public sphere. This is why we fight the so-called culture war. Because from a biblical worldview, it's ultimately about winning souls and advancing the kingdom of heaven. As the Lord told us to pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Stick around. I'll be back with some closing thoughts for the first hour. But here's Caedmon's Call, Hope to Carry On. Keep it right here on Faith FM. I'll be back. Fusion of Heart, Mind, and Soul. This is Open Up the Doors with Andy White here on Faith FM, WEGB 90.7 and 93.3 in that peak, WEGQ 91.7 in Quad. Hey folks, thanks for hanging out. First hour is almost over. I got a few minutes left here. I'll wrap up with some closing thoughts. Okay, just caught that. Yeah, okay. Anyway, just a couple of broadcast memos. The first hour of this broadcast re-airs today at 3 p.m., which is Thursday, and 1 p.m. on Saturday. If you missed any portion of the broadcast and you're on the road or at home doing some chores, you can tune in back today. In fact, don't even turn off the radio. Keep it right here on Faith FM. But also, I would like you to please subscribe to my YouTube channel and my Rumble channel. You can look me up on YouTube at Andy White, Open Up the Doors. Hit the little subscription bell and you'll be notified when we upload these broadcasts. We do archive them on YouTube, but more so even on, well, we archive them in both places, but I prefer Rumble. If you've never subscribed to my Rumble channel, please follow me there, AJ White 777, or just do the search and look up Open Up the Doors over there on Rumble. YouTube on occasion takes my videos down. Maybe they're going to be stopping that. I'll get into that in the second hour. There's some good stuff going on that I'm going to get to in the second hour. But I also want you to call in the second hour. So we'll see how the second hour goes. 631-725-2069. I'd love to hear from you. You've heard from me for almost a whole hour now. I'd love to hear from you. 631-725-2069. Call in during the second hour. All right, let me get back to it. I've only got a few minutes left here for the first hour, and I want to wrap some things up. As you all well know, of course, we celebrated the 4th of July this past week. And the Declaration of Independence ends with this pledge, quote, "And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence," a firm reliance on God. I could go on a money trail with that, but I won't. But we mutually, the signers wrote, actually signed, Thomas Jefferson wrote it. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. The Declaration of Independence, brothers and sisters, was ultimately signed and sealed with their blood. Many of the men who signed that document were subsequently killed by the British. Others lost their homes, wealth, fortunes, and families. And we can enjoy our freedom today because a handful of men over 247 years ago believed in the principles of freedom. And it pays to ask, where did they get their convictions from? On what supposition did they harness so much courage? The Declaration of Independence is premised on the fact that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and government can't take them away. Oh, they do take them away. It's called oppression. It's called tyranny. But our rights come from God. They don't come from the government. These men knew that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness were rights given by God. And the founding of America, brothers and sisters, the founding of our country, as many of you know, our freedoms, its philosophy of government were based squarely and solidly on the Judeo-Christian worldview. That is, what's the word I want to, enshrined in the Word of God. Despite what the historical revisionists and naysayers may want you to believe, Patrick Henry said it cannot be emphasized too strongly or too often that this great nation was founded not by religionists, but by Christians and the gospel of Jesus Christ. You don't hear that quote too much anymore in schools. But John Quincy Adams, whose father John Adams was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, said the highest glory of the American Revolution was this. Was it winning the battle? Well, yeah. Was it standing up for liberties? Well, yeah. But that's not what John Quincy Adams said. He said the highest glory of the American Revolution was this, that it connected in one indissoluble bond the principles of Christianity with the principles of civil government. And every secularist godless had just exploded over that quote, which John Quincy Adams, by the way, gave on a July 4th speech, approximately, I believe it might have been 40 years after the signing of the Declaration. I think it was the 40th or 50th anniversary of the signing. But I want to say this, because it's important. It is in that sense the bond of principles, not religious theocracy, but the principles, the worldview, the principles of Christianity with the principles of civil government. John Quincy Adams says, it's in that sense that America is, or once was, a Christian nation. I'm running out of time. It's not to be construed in the term Christian nation that there is or should be an institutionalized religion or a state church, such as is the case with Britain and the Church of England. However, America once was a Christian nation in the sense of its moral and biblical worldview. Today, many like to use the term secular nation to describe and say that America is a pluralistic society. But the term secular sounds rather inclusive and innocuous, does it not? But to be honest with you folks, The term secular is just a euphemistic way of saying pagan. America isn't just becoming an innocuous secular society. It is becoming a thoroughly full-fledged pagan society in its laws and governmental worldview. And my friends, this new paganism will prove to be far more tyrannical to the secularists more than any degree of Christianity could or ever would be. There is an incredible erosion of our liberties and God-given rights going on right now. There's a new Michigan law. I don't know if you heard about this, and I've only got a minute left, so I'll only touch upon it. But there's this new Michigan law that I am sure will eventually be thrown down as unconstitutional. Did you hear about this? The state of Michigan is trying to enact a law, a new hate crime bill that would make, quote, anyone who even feels, the legislation, HB 4474, specifically would make it a hate crime. Listen to this, to cause someone else to, quote, feel terrorized, frightened, or threatened. So in other words, for example, if I'm standing on a street corner with my Ask Me About Jesus sign, and someone says it makes them feel terrorized, frightened, or threatened, and ask me to leave, and I don't, I could be prosecuted. And penalties could be 5 years in prison or $10,000 fine. I seriously doubt this legislation will pass the Michigan Senate. The House passed it. But if it does, the Supreme Court will swat it down because they essentially already did last week. Nevertheless, America is in danger of losing its freedoms, folks. And that's why we fight the battle. That's why we fight the battle. That's why the gospel goes out there and engages in the culture. But I'm out of time for this first hour, and I got to run. But I'll be back with more in the second hour. So keep it right here on Faith FM. In the meantime, watch. Stand fast in the faith. Be brave, be strong, and let all that you do be done in love, beloved. Keep it right here on Faith FM. I'll be back.